Okay, great. Here I am once again hotspotting from out here in eastern New Mexico. Well, welcome to week 3 of Bio 303 and 304 for the summer of 2020. And let me start with the last. I got the first test graded. We have a grader too. Joseph Barnett's helping out with that. And I just want to say that in both classes, the 303 you guys had like a 79 average, and then 304 you had an 80 average, and that's really good. I'm very excited about that. And there's always room for a little bit of improvement here, right? So I sent out a couple emails explaining that on these essay questions, you want to explain these things fully, use details, and use the vocabulary words to help out, to do well. So one example is on the test, what happens with the lateral meristem of a cottonwood were to be damaged. Well, you have to know a couple things. A lateral meristem is a meristematic cells, right? These are the equivalent of stem cells, and they divide into both the vascular cambium and the cork cambium, okay? And it's that vascular cambium that forms secondary xylem, and that's what helps increase the width of the tree. So that's also important for secondary growth as well. But if this lateral meristem were to become damaged, you would damage both the lateral meristem, preventing the tree from making secondary xylem, so it wouldn't grow in width, and you would also damage its ability to make the cork cambium, which would damage its ability to make the bark as well. So now the tree is not going to grow, it's not going to have good bark, and that will definitely affect its primary growth, even though it could, nope, somebody just emailed me, even though it could extend lengthways into primary growth, it's not going to be actually sound, right? And it's not going to be able to get a lot of nutrients and water up there through the xylem. So these are the types of depths of questions that I want you to get to on your essays. And another one, the importance of plants in the evolutionary history. Yes, 304, I made you do some evolution because evolution is the central paradigm of biology, and understanding plant and animal form and function has its roots in understanding that plants evolve and everything evolves. It has its roots in evolution. So I asked this really big question on how have plants and the ancestors to plants have had a huge influence on terrestrial or on life on this planet and Bio 303, you guys are going to get that next week actually when we talk about Earth's history. And what most of you guys said was that, starting a billion years ago, that the ancestors of plants, which were these green algae, that they added oxygen to the atmosphere. And some of you went on to say, hey, it energized the atmosphere, which was good for plants and animals. And that is absolutely right. But one thing that a lot of you missed was that the very first green algae, going back a billion years ago, not only did it add oxygen to the atmosphere, it also created habitat. You had things growing, right? You had things growing around, and that created places for things to live. That's important because the more habitats you have, the more niches you can potentially create, the more diversification of animals you can have. And don't forget that we know that plants are autotrophs, right? So they're taking carbon dioxide and water, and they're making carbohydrates out of that. So what they also did was, in addition to creating habitat, they added nutrients and energy to these ecosystems. And about a billion years ago, this really began to spark the evolution of animals. And that was an important point that I was hoping some of you guys would make. And the plants, they did this again. And it's 303, these you guys are going to get this next week, that the Earth was barren for like 4.2 billion years. And then all of a sudden, in the beginning of the Ordovician, like 475 million years ago, we had the evidence of the first plants living on land. And then by 400 million years ago, in the Devonian, we've got plants everywhere. We had the first forest on the Earth, and that did several things. Once again, it created habitat complexity and created ecosystems, which led to a major round of diversification, both on plants and animals living in the environment. Now, plants, because they're putting they're doing photosynthesis, they're having an effect on the atmosphere as well. They're adding oxygen. That does several things. One is as animals, you and I, we got to have oxygen. And back in the Devonian and Carboniferous, right, the oxygen levels got like 35% of the Earth's atmosphere. Could you imagine seeing a 6-foot long centipede walking around? Well, that was the Devonian and the Carboniferous. We had this giganticism in arthropods because there was so much oxygen in the atmosphere. The other thing, photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide. So throughout the Carboniferous, CO2 levels, carbon dioxide affects climate change, right? So it drew it down over millions and millions of years. And by drawing that carbon dioxide levels down, it sparked an ice age, almost a bad one too. So the Earth became cooler and drier. That once again affected the evolution. It affected the evolution of plants. They evolved seeds and pollen, so they could protect their embryos. They're in a seed that's covered in a hard covering, and they could protect their gametes, which is the male gamete it's inside the pollen, around another protective coat to prevent desiccation. And then, of course, that sparked the conifers, which became dominant for the next 145 million years. And then, when plants evolved to be flowering plants at about 145 or so million years ago, we think the first flowering plants evolved, and that sparked another round of radiation in the animals as flowers evolved to attract pollinators and fruits evolved to protect the seeds and help with seed dispersal. So as you can see, plants were really important in the evolution of life. Okay, I did get one question from a student. This was a particularly good question, and it was, did the modern synthesis have like a bookend? Did it have a date it actually ended? And she put out that that Zomsky first put his book out in 1937. Was that a good end? But wait, it was redistributed or renamed in 1970 and published again. And then there's been some I can't even think of the word. There's been some meetings lately to talk about where evolution is going. When we talk about the modern synthesis, it usually begins in the 1890s when the work of Gregor Mendel was discovered and the work of Thomas Hunt in the early 1900s was really adding to our knowledge of genetics and heredity. And this continued on through the 20s and the 30s. And by the 1940s, we had this pretty good synthesis of heredity and genetics and evolution by natural selection, all kind of wrapped up into one package. Now, interestingly, in the modern synthesis, they still did not know the structure of DNA because the modern synthesis was 1940s. It wasn't until Rosalind Franklin took her X-ray crystallography of DNA around 1952, and it was handed off to Watson and Crick, who figured it out and then published it. And that was like in the early 1950s. She died in the late 50s, and then Watson, Crick, and Wilkins got the Nobel Prize in 1960 for their discovery of, or her discovery of DNA, the structure of it. And in the 1960s, they cracked the genetic code. So it's pretty amazing that the modern synthesis happened without knowing the structure of DNA, without knowing how it's replicated, and without knowing the genetic code. That, like I said, that came along much later. Okay, so if anybody wants, you can shoot me a message here on the live before I get it, and if I get a question, I'll answer it. But for right now, we've got test 3 up. I am working on getting your next podcast up. I've almost got one done, 303. It's on species. 304, I got delayed a little bit yesterday. I'll try to get one up as soon as I can today. Okay. Now, to help you guys out with test 3, and I think I want to go ahead and do this for the next test, let's talk about the big 10-point question. I have posted that question on the test description, so you have a copy of that and you can see it. Okay. So for 304, your test question that's going to be the 10-point test question is, how do plants move toward blue light? Okay, 10 points. You guys, you know it ahead of time. Write it ahead of time. Spend some time on it, and then you can put it right. You can plop it right into your test, and you don't even have to look that up during the test. Now, because I've given it to you ahead of time, it will be graded hard. And the reason why is this is a large, complex question, right? How do plants bend toward blue light. And to do well on this question, you better talk about blue light receptors. You need to talk about phototropins. You need to talk about the acid growth hypothesis. So you need to start mentioning things like expansins. You need to mention proton pumps. You need to mention the hormones that are activated, like auxin, and how auxin is actively transported throughout the plant. So you need to take this narrative and answer pretty complex way, right? Because the more details and the more examples you have, the higher your score. All right. And then in Bio 303, your 10-point question is, what causes speciation? And yeah, sure, you can say a barrier to gene flow causes speciation. That is a correct answer. It's like, I think in my email, I mentioned something about, yeah, asking a weightlifter how he builds muscle. And he goes, I go to the gym. Well, yeah, we know that, right? So if you're going to talk about barriers to gene flow, right, you need to talk about allopatric speciation, sympatric speciation. You need to provide examples of things like vicariance, right, prezygotic barriers. These things are important to discuss in that question. Okay, well, I don't have any questions right now. I'll go ahead and post this up for everybody so you can see it, and that way you have of what's going to happen on the next test. Don't forget, you'll also have 4 more 5-point essay questions, 10 of the multiple choice essay questions, and you've also got just an essay up for both of classes. It's just a couple questions. They're meant to be kind of fun, kind of like a metacognition to think about the material you're learning in the courses. And right now, almost all of you, almost everybody in the class has the bonus points. I went ahead and posted them. So get your test done on time. You'll get to keep those bonus points. If not, if you turn them in late, don't forget you can still do it late. It's just going to cost you a little bit. All right, until next time.